All right. We are gathered in the parlor this morning. Our study this morning is Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. As I looked uh, at the notes in what the writer had given us, interesting thing that I found was that this is done as an acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet. And I didn't realize that, and I looked at it and I tried to uh, work on it a little bit last night and try to figure out how I might piece it back to our alphabet. Wasn't successful. That's one of the things that we've lost in our translation. But this was originally done just like we might say A is for apple, B is for boy, C is for whatever C might be for. This would be that kind of an acrostic presentation. So one more way of presenting information, of training, is utilized in this week's study. By order of introduction, the first section of this study is verses 10 through 12, commitment to her husband. Supply and demand is what I thought about. The more difficult to find, the greater the value, and what is more valuable than a spouse you can trust. Our second section, verses 13 through 16, wise in her work. Uh, Willingness to work illustrates wisdom that the fruits are worthy of the labor. Sure in her reputation, verses 23 through 27, her labors produce a family that influences the community, and her own business practices are not only acceptable but sought after. And then the last section, verses 28 through 31, honored through fearing God. The conclusion is the fear of the Lord produced the wisdom to labor diligently for her family, which has gotten her praise from them, but she also reaps praise in the community where her workmanship is recognized, as well as her kind and wise words, and she too reaps the good she has dealt on her household. Our memory verse comes from chapter 22, verse 19. That thy trust may be in the Lord, I have made known to thee this day, even to thee. Our key doctrine is man, and the focal text of that doctrine is the sacredness of human responsibility is evident in that God created man in his own image, and in that Christ died for man. Therefore, every person of every race possesses full dignity and is worthy of respect in Christian love. Next week's key doctrine will also be man. Our scripture text for that doctrine this week is Genesis 1:26 through 30. And that is, and God said, let us make in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to every thing that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life. I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. we look at our first section of our study, Finding Honor, Commitment to Her Husband, will someone read Proverbs 31:10 through 12 for us?
Who can find a wife of noble character? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusted her. He will not lack anything good. She rewards him with good, not evil, all the days of her life.
Why would it be difficult to find a woman of noble character? It was interesting, the illustration that, or not illustration, but the scripture text that our pastor referenced this morning. The efforts of Samson to find a wife. He went into the Philistines looking for a woman of great beauty.
What this all talks about is more Christian wife. They were limited back there this time. They were Philistines and all that. They were not Christian. They were not.
Yeah. So what I wrote down is spouses are not perfect. I'm not a perfect husband. My wife is not a perfect wife. Any more than we ourselves are. We should treasure the noble characteristics of our spouses more so than any earthly gain, and be able to trust that their plans are good for us, just as they should be able to trust us. And what I thought about was, you know, I could beat up my wife about her failures, but then on the flip side, I could look at this passage and I could think of things that I could praise her for. I could praise her for being up all hours of the night trying to make sure things are caught up and the children are prepared for school the next day or whatever event they're going to, or just the general daily activities. And when we look at this passage, everybody's going to fail if you hold them up to a perfect standard. So I think it's got, like you were alluding to, it's got a spiritual context. There's a difference between a believer and a non-believer. But even we as believers are going to fail to meet all of the standard. If it weren't so, then we wouldn't need Christ. What benefits exist in a marriage relationship where there is trust?
You don't have suspicion and distrust going on all the time. There's more harmony.
Harmony? Lack of suspicion and distrust would make a relationship of harmony. I agree. Our passage tells us that the heart is rewarded with good in a relationship where there's trust. And I thought about relationships in the Bible that we could compare. And I went to the negative extreme and the best example that I could think of. And the best example I could think of was the book of Ruth, where we see this woman who, after the death of her husband, was faithful to her mother-in-law. And the Lord blessed her with a husband, and she would be the in the ancestry of David the king. And on the negative side, I thought of this man that we were looking at this morning, Samson, how he put his trust into a harlot named Delilah, and that was his demise. Where we put our trust is important, and a good trust in the right place, is a great blessing. Moving on to our next section, wise in her work. Would someone read verses 13 through 16 for us?
She collects wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the merchant ship, bringing her food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and portions for her female servants. She evaluates a field and buys it. She plants a vineyard with her earnings.
Was
Looks like she's a good administrator.
She is. She is that. Um, was our example, uh, this woman of virtuous character, was she toiling because she had to?
Seems like her heart's in it. She's wanting to.
She wanted to. She did it because she wanted to. Yeah.
Respect for her family.
If we didn't see that she was willing, we would look at it and we would realize that she had servants, and she could have just told them to do it. Instead of her waiting on them, they could have been waiting on her. How would you describe the work of this virtuous woman? I like what you said, administrative. Other thoughts?
She's certainly industrious.
Industrious. We often think of women in biblical times as not having business privileges, but this passage is clearly showing our example was not just buying and selling merchandise, but even the purchase of property. She bought and sold and saved to buy things of more value. We see a well thought out business model of reinvesting the profits to do bigger and better things. Providing for the needs of a household is a task load that grows and does not cease. Many details go without thanks or notice. Feeding, clothing, and working to ensure the provisions to continue the necessities are met is a task worthy of honor and a task that is best conducted with wisdom. Our study omits verses 17 through 22. She draws to her strength and reveals that her arms are strong. She sees that her profits are good and her lamp never goes out at night. She extends her hands to the spinning staff and her hands hold the spindle. Her hands reach out to the poor and she extends her hands to the needy. She is not afraid for her household when it snows, for all her household are doubly clothed. She makes her own bed coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. As we read the descriptions of a virtuous woman, aren't these also to be characteristics of the church, the bride of Christ? We should labor to provide first for those in the church and second for those without. I referenced Ephesians 4:28. Let him that stole steal no more, and let him work with his hands that he'll have to give to them that needeth. In 1 Timothy 5:3-4, the provision for widows. 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 1 Timothy All right, our next section is sure in her reputation. Will someone read for us Proverbs 31:23 through 27?
My husband is known at the city gates, where he sits among the elders of the land. She makes and sells linen garments. She delivers belts to the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she can laugh at the time to come. Her mouth speaks wisdom, and loving instructions is on her tongue. She watches over the activities of her household, and is never idle.
What's the relevance of her husband sitting at the city gates?
She's in a place of honor and leadership, I think. She's in the community.
Position of honor and leadership?
Sounds like she was doing all the work, doesn't
Well, it says that her husband sat. Yeah, it does sound like. So, what's your point there?
Not really a comment, just an observation.
I
Guess it's meant to emphasize the ability and qualities of this virtuous woman, and not to praise her husband, essentially.
Sometimes you'll hear people say my better half, or they'll talk about someone else's better half, and I think it illustrates that uh, for the husband to be successful and to be able to be free to work and do things successfully, he has to have the support of a wife that's taking care of the things to ensure that he's able to be successful. It's hard to go it alone. Uh, as I understand the city gates, I think the best illustration we have in the Bible is Ruth 4:1 through 12. They were the place of judgment and political activity. As such, I see 2 points in referencing her husband's activity. First, she has clothed her husband such that he fits in with the ruling class. And second, her confidence in him has led to his political involvement in decisions for their community, active enough to where the leaders know him by name. So he wasn't someone who just went in and tried to get something done, but he was frequent enough to where they knew his name. Uh, were her labors restricted to the home?
She was at home, probably with her mind, probably vineyards, but, people that think women that work from home or in the home because it's unproductive. But a woman that takes care of the home and has to work outside the home.
Where did she plant her vineyards?
She bought land and planted.
In a field that she had bought, she had considered and bought. So she had done some business activities outside of the home to get that land to plant the vineyard. She had bought and sold stuff that she had made or that she had grown and had accrued wealth, and then bought a piece of land for herself. The reputation of this example of a virtuous woman is one who not only toils night and day to address physical needs in the home, but deals with merchants to buy and sell, getting gain, and has also taken time to address spiritual priorities, gaining the wisdom to know when and how to speak kind words or instruction to those who need a guide. We read there that in verse 26, her mouth speaks wisdom and loving instruction is on her tongue. Moving to our last section, honored through fearing God. Will someone read verses 28 through 31?
Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. Many women have done noble deeds, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. Give her the reward of her labor, and let her works praise her as she digs.
Do you want to be praised?
Everybody likes that.
Everybody likes that. I may not think about it something as that they want, but it's nice to have somebody say something good about you. The fear of the Lord is not only the beginning of wisdom. These last verses of Proverbs tell us that it is also the path to praise. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Who will praise her?
Children and her husband.
Her children and her husband. Why will they praise her?
She's doing all the work.
Because she's doing all the work.
She's putting food on the table.
Yeah,
Washing her clothes.
running the business.
Yeah. Not for her beauty and not for her charm, but for her virtue, for all the good they have been blessed with because of her diligence. Looking at this last verses here, the last word is that she too will benefit from her labor, and that her husband will not be the only one known in the city gates. The influence she has had there will be to her praise as well. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. What would you add? What were our own mothers and grandmothers like?
People to be respected, honored, loved. They took care of the family.
Gathering the stuff in the garden, canning and freezing, and all this other stuff during the summertime, now for the winter.
I can remember my mother waking us up in the morning with piano playing. We would hear some kind of hymn just about every morning. Uh, and I can remember going to my grandmother's house, and all the family would eat, and she would make sure everybody was served before she fixed her plate. And if somebody came in late, she would stop her meal and make sure they were addressed. And then when everybody started leaving, Grandma would be in there cleaning the kitchen up and making sure that everything was the way it needed to be. Uh, and you couldn't have enjoyed those meals and had the fellowship that we had growing up in that household without that labor that was done. Finding honor. Faithfulness of a husband and wife to one another is one of the greatest blessings and clearest parables a believer can demonstrate of the relationship between Christ and the church. And our writer wrote it as believers are to honor their marriage commitments. The responsibility to provide for your own family is a precedent taught for believers. Believers are to wisely provide for the needs of their families. Believers are to be active in society, working to attain a quiet, peaceable life where the gospel is shared. Our writer wrote, believers are to use their influence for the kingdom. Believers' lives are to be God honoring. We are to act with love and wisdom. Believers are to honor God with their lives. That's all I got. Next week, we will be getting into Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, as I was taught to call it. Chapter 2, verses 15 through chapter 3, verse 5 is our text. Our memory verse will be coming from 1 John 4:19. We love him because he first loved us. And as I stated earlier, our key doctrine will be man. I think the Song of Songs complements the chapter 31 virtuous woman, and I think that the two are both not only a illustration of a wife in the home, but they are also an illustration of how the church should interact towards Christ. All right.